Hello, my friends. If you enjoy the content, like, comment, and subscribe.
I never thought I'd be the kind of person who notices every little sound, who jumps at the whisper of a branch against the window or a shadow shifting just outside the porch light. But here I am, and I can't stop hearing it. It started the night I decided to stay home alone. My roommate had gone out of town for the weekend, and I thought it would be nice, peaceful even, to have the apartment to myself. I never imagined that peace could turn into a kind of terror that burrows into your chest. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, half listening to a documentary about unsolved crimes when a faint knock rattled the door. Not the door to the hallway, the actual front door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the apartment building was quiet. The only other tenants were either out of town or asleep. I told myself it was probably someone in a neighboring door, or maybe a loose pipe vibrating. I tried to convince myself, but the sound had a rhythm to it that didn't feel random. Knock, paw, knock, knock. I stood and moved closer to the peephole, heart hammering, only to see the empty hallway. Just the dimly lit corridor, the carpet frayed, the walls marked with years of tenant mistakes and chipped paint. Nobody was there. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're being ridiculous," I whispered, and for a moment it was quiet again. I tried to settle back onto the couch, but the feeling didn't leave. It was like the silence had weight. I kept glancing at the door, telling myself I would just ignore it. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. My phone buzzed, a text from my roommate. "Have fun being alone this weekend." I smiled, even though the room felt colder than usual. Then the knocking started again, louder this time. I froze, gripping my phone like a lifeline. It wasn't like before. It wasn't the light, intermittent taps. It was heavy, deliberate. I crept toward the door, peeking through the peephole again. Empty hallway. Nothing. I unlocked the door, just enough to crack it open, a small gap between me and the world outside. My neighbor's door across the hall was still closed. The hallway was empty. My imagination was running wild. I know that now. But at the time, I felt something crawling along my spine, that tiny, almost imperceptible chill that told you something isn't right. I slammed the door shut and locked it, triple-checked the chain, and tried to laugh. It's nothing, just nothing. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to distract myself with the documentary again. But then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound from the other side of the door. It was like someone or something was moving across the hallway floor just beyond my sight. Slow, careful, calculated. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my roommate. "Remember, don't forget to lock up. You never know." I rolled my eyes, muttering, yeah. I felt stupid, silly, but the sound didn't stop. In fact, it grew. The dragging turned into scraping, like nails or something rough being pulled along the metal door frame. I couldn't think. I just couldn't. I ran to the bedroom, grabbing the knife from the drawer, a pathetic comfort, and my phone. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was outside my door, but then silence. The scraping had stopped. I strained my ears, listening. Nothing. My pulse was a drum in my ears. And then I heard it, breathing, soft, shallow, almost imperceptible, from right outside my door. I panicked. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded tiny in the apartment, fragile. Nothing. I tried to open the door to run, but the chain lock was too tight. I yanked at it, fumbling, and the breathing stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the wall, eyes fixed on that unassuming wooden slab that had never looked more sinister. My mind raced. My hand shook, and then a knock, so loud it shook the door frame. Knock, knock, knock. I jumped back, knife raised. I'm calling the cops. I shouted. Silence. Then from the other side, a slow, deliberate whisper. Not words, just a sound. H, like air being pulled through teeth. I bolted to the bedroom window, tried to convince myself to just jump down to the fire escape and get out. But the city was quiet, streets empty. The kind of quiet that makes you feel exposed, like everyone is hiding, watching, waiting. And I just knew that whoever was outside wasn't planning to wait politely for me to leave. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like a person looming. I called my friend, anyone, just to hear a human voice. But my phone showed no signal. And the knocking, it never stopped. Always just at the edge of my hearing. Sometimes soft, sometimes hard, always there. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. I needed to see. I crept to the door, slowly lifting the chain, preparing myself for the worst. When I opened it, nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. Just the faint traces of something heavy having dragged across the floor outside my door. And then I saw it. Written in the condensation on the inside of the door's peephole, I know you're awake. I screamed and slammed the door shut, locking it again. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Every time I tried, I heard that breathing, that soft scraping, the whisper in the dark. I called my roommate, begged her to come home. She laughed it off, said I was imagining things. I told myself the same thing at first. But then it happened again the following week. Same time, same pattern. I was never physically hurt, but I was terrified every single second. And always the same message, I know you're awake. I moved out shortly after. New apartment, different neighborhood, but the feeling never left. Even now, years later, I notice when doors creak, when shadows move in ways they shouldn't. I hear whispers sometimes in the quietest parts of the night. And last week, I saw someone standing outside my new apartment across the street, watching. I froze, heart hammering, and I noticed something that made me sick to my stomach. They weren't looking at the street or the buildings. They were looking at me. I ran inside, locked the door, and I haven't looked out since. But I know the truth. They're always outside, always, watching, waiting. And maybe that's the worst part, not knowing when they'll finally come in, not knowing why they're there, just knowing with a certainty that gnaws at your soul that the world outside your door is not safe. Not ever. I keep my lights on all night now, even though I know it doesn't matter. I keep the doors locked, every possible lock in place. I try to sleep with my phone in my hand, but sometimes in the middle of the night I hear it, the soft, slow knock. And I know they're outside, waiting. I had always thought the Appalachian Mountains were more myth than menace. Growing up in the city, I'd only seen them from postcards or in tourist brochures promising majestic trails and serene camping. But my best friend, Carter, had a way of convincing me that our lives were missing something if we didn't spend a weekend deep in the woods. That's how I found myself driving a beat-up Jeep into a stretch of forest no GPS would acknowledge, a place Carter swore was off the grid in all the right ways. We arrived as the sun was dipping behind the ridges, spilling long, twisting shadows across the pine-scented trails. The air smelled like damp earth and the sharp tang of pine resin, the kind that makes your lungs tingle the first time you breathe it in. We parked near a clearing Carter had picked out, the one that opened to a creek barely wide enough to step across. He claimed it was the perfect spot, secluded, scenic, and, he said with a grin, just wild enough to make us remember we're alive. The first night was unremarkable, at least as unremarkable as camping in the middle of nowhere can be. We built a fire, roasted some frankfurters, and traded stories about past hikes gone wrong. Carter's stories were always dramatic, bordering on absurd, but I laughed along, the kind of laughter that felt easier when surrounded by the comforting glow of firelight. The stars above were brighter than anything I'd ever seen, and I fell asleep feeling a calm I hadn't realized I was craving. I woke just after midnight, not to the sound of animals, but to something else. At first, I couldn't place it, low, almost imperceptible, like a whisper carried on the wind. But it was there, persistent, a barely there rasp that seemed to float between the trees. I nudged Carter awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He rolled over, squinting through the firelight. "Hear what?" "That whispering." "I don't know. Sounds like someone talking." Carter laughed softly, though his eyes were sharp in the firelight. "It's the woods talking. They do that sometimes. Just wind through the leaves, man." I wanted to believe him, but the sound grew. Not the wind. It wasn't random rustling or the distant hoot of an owl. It was deliberate, something dragging itself across the ground, low and steady, almost like footsteps, but they were wrong. Too many of them, too measured, too quiet. I tried to wake up fully, to convince myself it was nothing, but the whispers started forming words. I swear they did. They were low, guttural, and distant, repeating a phrase I couldn't understand. I shook my head. "Carter, this isn't the wind," I murmured. He froze, listening. Then he nodded slowly, a look I didn't recognize on his face. "Maybe we should check it out. Just a quick look." I protested. The rational part of me screamed to stay in the tent, to ignore whatever it was. But Carter, as always, had this stubborn streak that I could never overcome. Before I knew it, we were both stepping into the dark, guided by nothing but our headlamps. The forest changed at night. In the daylight, it had seemed friendly, welcoming even. But in the dark, the trees closed in like towering, silent watchers. The whispers were clearer now, surrounding us from every angle. They weren't English words, but they had rhythm, cadence, intent. They weren't just sounds, they were invitations. And then I saw the first mark. A tree about 20 feet from us had deep gouges carved into its bark, vertical, jagged, as if something had scratched at it with claws. The smell hit me before I saw it. Iron, raw and metallic like blood, but old, almost dry. Carter was silent, staring at it, his face pale in the headlamp glow. What made this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the ground. There, embedded in the moss, were footprints. They were unlike any human footprints I've ever seen. Elongated, narrow, with toes that ended in sharp points. They didn't look natural. They led deeper into the woods, winding around trees in impossible patterns, as if the creature that made them could appear and disappear at will. Against my better judgment, Carter followed them. I had no choice but to go after him. Every step into the darkness made the whispers louder, closer. The air grew colder, the kind of bone-chilling cold that seeps through your clothes and sinks into your chest. My flashlight flickered, briefly revealing shapes moving between the trees. Shadows that weren't shadows. Eyes that reflected light too brightly, then vanished. We stopped at a small clearing where the moonlight touched the forest floor. There was a circle of stones in the center, blackened with soot. Around it, more symbols were carved into the surrounding trees. I recognized some as ancient, The kind of runes associated with old Appalachian folklore, warnings, curses, rites. Carter's jaw went tight. He whispered, "This isn't right. We shouldn't be here." Then it happened. The whispers stopped. Silence, sudden and complete, pressing against our ears and chest. And from that silence, a sound, a low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, coming from behind us. Something moved in the shadows, impossibly fast, circling us, sniffing the air like a predator. My gut dropped. I realized with horror that we were not alone. Not human, not animal. Something else, something older than the mountains themselves. Carter grabbed my arm. "Run." We bolted, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks, the darkness swallowing us whole. Behind us, the thing followed, silent at first, then with a wet, dragging sound that made my stomach turn. I dared to glance back once and saw nothing. Then a shadow darted, impossibly tall, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. We ran until we could no longer hear it. Or maybe it stopped, waiting. Either way, we collapsed near a creek, gasping for air. Our flashlights flickered, revealing the forest in ghostly silver. Carter's hands shook as he checked our packs. Nothing was missing, but I knew, somewhere in those woods, something had been watching, learning. The rest of that weekend was a blur of exhaustion and fear. We didn't sleep. We didn't explore. We packed our things at first light and left, vowing never to return. But even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about the sounds in those woods. The whispers, the eyes, the footprints that didn't belong to any animal I know. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that voice again calling me back. I'd always thought camping was supposed to be peaceful. Fresh air, starry skies, the crackle of a fire, the occasional hoot of an owl. But that night changed everything I believed about the woods. I could still feel the fear in my chest, as if it's pressing against my ribs, even now, months later. It started as a simple trip. My 3 closest friends, Mark, Jess, and Tyler, and I have been planning a weekend away in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We wanted isolation, no cell service, just a few days to forget work, bills, and the endless noise of life. Tyler insisted he knew the perfect spot, a remote clearing near a stream, tucked behind thick pines. He'd been there once as a kid, he said, and the place was magical. We arrived in the late afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long, golden streaks on the forest floor. Birds called overhead, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. We set up camp, Mark struggling with the tent, while Jess collected firewood. Tyler wandered off to explore and came back bragging about a secret waterfall just a quarter-mile away. Everything seemed perfect until night fell. The fire burned brightly, casting our shadows against the surrounding trees. We told stories, laughed too loudly, and joked about the typical horror cliches. But as the forest darkened, a subtle unease settled over me. It started as a sound, a low, almost imperceptible scraping coming from just beyond the ring of our firelight. Probably just a raccoon, Mark said, tossing another log onto the fire. But I didn't hear anything like a raccoon. It was heavier, deliberate, slow, something that moved in a way no ordinary animal would. I tried to shake it off, but then the sounds multiplied. Branches snapped, leaves rustled. I thought I saw a shadow moving between the trees, too tall, too upright to be a deer. Jess noticed it too. Her laughter stopped mid-sentence. and her eyes were wide, scanning the dark tree line. "Maybe it's just Tyler playing a prank," she whispered. But Tyler was sitting beside me, staring into the fire. His face was pale, almost too still, and he didn't speak. Then we heard it, a whisper, faint at first, almost drowned out by the fire crackling, but unmistakably human. "Go, go." None of us said anything. We froze, listening. The whisper came again, closer this time, like it was circling us. Mark tried to laugh it off. "It's the wind. Trees, nature stuff." But I know what I heard. It wasn't the wind. It was intentional, directed, malevolent. We decided to stay inside the tent for the night. Tyler, Jess, and Mark agreed, though reluctantly. The tent was small, cramped, and the shadows of the firelight danced on its thin fabric. None of us slept. Every rustle, every snapping branch made our hearts pound. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the feeling of someone, or something, standing just outside the tent. I dared not move, hardly breathed. Then the zipper of the tent slowly creaked open. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused to work. A cold, damp breeze swept in, and then I smelled it. The metallic tang of blood, fresh, unmistakable. "Who's there?" I whispered, my throat tight. No response, only the whispering, repeating, circling. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jerked awake, my hand clutching empty air. I was alone in the dark, but the whispering continued, growing louder, almost chanting now. Morning light never felt so relieving. I bolted out of the tent, my friends already outside, looking pale and shaken. Did anyone else hear that last night?" I asked. Tyler swallowed hard. I thought I was imagining things. But yeah, something was out there. We decided to cut the trip short, pack up and leave. But as we walked back toward the trailhead, the forest seemed wrong. Too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. Even the stream sounded sluggish, like it was holding its breath. And that's when we saw them. Footprints. Not animal prints. Tall, thin, with elongated toes. Like the kind of thing you'd imagine from a nightmare. They circled the area where we'd camped and disappeared into the underbrush, moving in ways no human could. We quickened our pace, hearts pounding. By the time we reached the parking lot, we were shaking, pale, and quiet. But I noticed something I didn't want to admit at the time. The footprints weren't gone. They followed the edge of the lot, ending at the tree line, staring at us as we drove away. For months after, I tried to forget it. Friends dismissed it as paranoia, fear, and maybe mild hallucinations from exhaustion. But then Tyler sent me a photo out of the blue. A single, grainy picture of our campsite. And in the corner, just behind a tree, I saw it, a shadow. Tall, thin, unmoving. Watching, waiting. I've never been camping since. I don't even hike anymore. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through my apartment, I hear it, the whispering call my name, telling me to go back. And I know one day, if I do, I might not come back. I never believed in the things people whispered about in the hollers of the Appalachians. At least, not until I lived it. People around West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Kentucky talk about strange lights, eerie sounds, disappearing hunters, and shadows that move on their own. I always assumed those were just stories told around campfires to keep kids afraid of the dark. When I first set foot in the mountains that summer, I thought I'd prove that point. I was wrong in ways I still can't explain, and I still can't fully believe what happened. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Charleston, West Virginia. I grew up with the Appalachians as a backdrop. Endless ridges, thick forests, and valleys that stay green even in late fall. I spent most of my childhood camping, fishing, and hiking, learning the names of birds and the paths of old ridgelines. But once I turned 18, life got busy. College jobs, bills, the world pulled me away from the mountains, and I barely had time to visit. Well, my best friend, Harper, reached out in June of last year with a plan to go backpacking through a remote section of the terrain near the New River Gorge. I was thrilled. She had a map, permits, and all the gear. We wanted a challenge. Rough trails, no easy cell reception, a place where you actually felt removed from society. Just us in the woods, she had said, grinning over FaceTime. I didn't know how right she would be. We met in Summersville early on a Friday morning, loaded our backpacks into the truck, and drove until pavement gave way to gravel. At that point, the forest closed in, and it felt like another world entirely. Even in midsummer, the air had a chill beneath the canopy, something I hadn't expected. The sun struggled to reach the forest floor through ancient trees. Our first 2 days were uneventful, exactly what we hoped for. We followed a seldom used trail that wound through thick undergrowth, past springs that babbled over mossy rocks, and along ridges where we caught breathtaking views of endless mountains folded into shades of blue and green. At night, we'd make a campfire, roast bacon and beans, and talk about everything and nothing. No weirdness, no signs of anyone else on the trail. Just us and the magnificent quiet. That all changed on the third morning. We packed up camp at sunrise and started down an overgrown segment of trail that dropped steeply into a hollow I'd never seen on any map. I remember thinking the place looked too perfect to be there, like a postcard painted into the wilderness. But Harper was already stepping down the slope, so I followed. The second I set foot in the hollow, the air changed. It felt oppressive, not heavy exactly, just wrong, like the world had exhaled something dark. My skin prickled, and the birds, whatever few were left at that hour, stopped. Dead silent. I looked up just as Harper froze too. "Did you feel?" she started, and then cut off as a single whisper seemed to race through the trees. I heard it, and I'm still not sure what it said. It sounded like wind at first, but too deliberate. It passed through the leaves as if something unseen had spoken. I swear I heard something like a word, or half a word. See, alone, nothing more. Harper looked at me, her face pale. "Let's just keep going," she said quietly. But that voice stayed in my head. I couldn't shake it. We pushed forward, deeper into the hollow, and the trail faded fast. Old roots and fallen logs blocked the path. It looked like no one had walked through here for decades. I checked the GPS on my phone. We were supposed to hit a creek that led to our next waypoint, but the signal flickered and died. I shook the device, then checked the compass. South. We headed that way. A few hours later, the sky flickered. Clouds, dense and unnatural, rolled in even though the forecast had predicted clear skies. A sudden chill cut through the forest, and the trees seemed to lean closer, watching us. Then we heard the footsteps. At first it was just one, something heavy, pacing just beyond our sight. Then another, then another. They circled us. The sounds thudded on dead leaves, too regular, too deliberate for deer or bear. "Stay calm," Harper whispered, gripping my arm. "Probably just hunters." I didn't think so. Not with the way the footsteps kept moving, never stopping, always just out of view. I raised my voice. "We're here. Hunters. Show yourselves." The forest responded with silence. Not quiet, just nothing. No wind, no birds, no footsteps. It was like the world blinked. Then we heard it, a low hum, almost like chanting deep in the underbrush. It wasn't words, just tones that rose and fell, harmonizing with the forest in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I realized I was shaking. Harper was too. "Let's go back," she said, her voice barely audible. "We should just leave this hollow." But we couldn't find the trail. We turned in every direction, and the forest seemed to warp around us. Trees that looked familiar a moment before now twisted into shapes that didn't belong. Every ridge we climbed seemed to drop us deeper into the same damn hollow. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt fractured there. And then we saw the lights. At first, they were tiny dots, dim, orange sparks flickering between old oak trunks, like lanterns, but they floated, drifting lazily as if beckoning us deeper. Harper grabbed my pack. "We follow that?" she asked with a mix of hope and terror. "I don't know," I whispered back, but something pulled me toward them, a force I couldn't explain. We walked toward the lights, and as we got closer, the humming returned. Deeper now, louder, resonating through the earth beneath our boots. The lights drew us into a clearing we never knew existed, a wide meadow blanketed in a strange fog that glowed under the late afternoon sun. There were shapes in the fog, tall, distorted silhouettes that didn't quite look human. Some hunched, some stretched tall as pines, all still. They formed a circle around a massive stone, ancient and carved, its surface etched with spirals and symbols that defied comprehension. I felt like my mind went numb. Harper reached for me, tugging harder this time. "Let's just go," she hissed. I tried to move. God, I tried, but my feet were rooted. It felt like gravity itself had a hold on us, pinning us to the mossy earth. Then the lights converged at the center of the circle, weaving into a figure, neither male nor female, tall and luminous, almost transparent, glowing a sickly amber. The hum peaked, vibrating in my skull. I heard that whisper again. "Caleb." The thing at the center lifted a hand, long and slender, and pointed at us. That's when the ground began to tremble. We ripped ourselves free and ran. I don't know how we escaped the clearing, how we passed through trees that blinked in and out of sight, but we did. I could hear something following, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. Eventually, we burst onto a marked trail, one we recognized. The air felt normal again, sunlight cutting through the brush like nothing had happened. But we didn't stop running until we hit a ranger station 2 miles down the trail. The ranger was a middle-aged man with kind eyes. When we told him what happened, he smiled apologetically. "That hollow," he said. "Nobody goes near there anymore. Some call it dead place." "What do you mean?" Harper asked, trembling. He shrugged. "Old-timers talk about folks getting lost, hearing voices, seeing lights that ain't stars. They say the trees don't want you leaving once you're in. Folks disappear out there every few years." I looked at him, confused and angry. "Disappear?" "We got out." He nodded slowly. "Some do. Most don't." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him he was crazy. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. We got food and water and waited as a search party checked the area. Not for us, we told them, but for the hollow we'd been in. They found nothing. No clearing. No stone. No strange carvings. Even the overgrown path we swore we followed was gone, replaced by unbroken forest. The search team scratched their heads. One pulled up an old topo map and said, "There was never a trail here. Doesn't look like there ever was." I stared at that map for a long time. I wanted it to be wrong. I needed it to be wrong, but it wasn't. I went back home with Harper that night. We didn't speak about what happened until days later when the nightmares began. I started waking up around 3 a.m. every night, drenched in sweat, hearing that hum pulsing in my skull. Sometimes I would swear I saw orange lights flicker beneath my bedroom door, as if they were calling me back. Harper said she had the same dreams, same hum, same whisper. Caleb. Harper. We tried to convince ourselves it was PTSD, stress, our minds tricking us after an intense hike. But neither of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. Then one night, about 2 weeks after we got back, the power went out. My whole neighborhood went dark at exactly 2:59 a.m. I groaned and reached for my phone, but the battery died. In the silence that followed, a light appeared outside my window. It wasn't like headlights. It was orange, like the lights in that clearing. Steady, flickering, moving slowly across the yard. I froze. Then I heard the hum. It started low and built in pitch, resonating through the walls, the floor, my bones. I wanted to look away. I tried, but I couldn't. The light stopped right outside my window, and I swear I saw a shape, a tall, slender silhouette, like a distorted shadow among the trees. It stood perfectly still. Then the whisper came again, clear this time, "Come back." My breath caught in my throat. I ran to Harper's house that night. She answered the door, pale, eyes wide. "You saw it too," she said without prompting. I nodded, unable to speak. We stared at each other for a long moment, both trembling. "We have to go back," Harper said finally. I shook my head. "No, never." She looked hurt, then remorseful. "I can't sleep anymore," she said. "It's calling me." I wanted to tell her no, that going back would mean something unspeakable, but a part of me agreed. A part of me felt like I was already there, like something had followed me home the day we escaped. We researched that hollow, talked to old forest rangers and neighbors who'd lived in the area for decades. Some whispered about ancient spirits rooted deep in the mountains. Others mentioned a lost valley that hunters used to talk about, a place that shouldn't exist on any map. One man, gray-bearded and hunched, leaned forward when we asked him about it. "You don't just go into a place like that," he said, "and you damn sure don't come back the same. The mountains, they take what they want." I felt my skin crawl. "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than the peaks themselves. "Some places are threshold," he said softly, "between ours and theirs. They bleed into each other. Folks who step through rarely make it back. And when they do, they're never truly home again." I didn't sleep that night. For a week, I avoided windows at night, convinced something was out there watching. My dreams were constant whispers and humming, and sometimes I could swear I felt cold hands on my shoulders as I slept, pulling me back to that hollow. Harper vanished 2 nights later. I came home from work around 7 p.m. Her front door was open, lights off, and her car gone. I called her phone. No answer, just static and then that hum. I felt it before I heard it, deep in the air like distant thunder. It grew louder as if something was close. Then her phone rang in my pocket. I looked down and the caller ID said, "Unknown." I answered. Her voice came through, weak, distant, trembling, "Caleb, come back." Then silence. I ran to my truck and hit the road. I didn't care where I was going, just away from that voice, that hollow, that place. For 2 days I drove, away from the mountains, away from the forest. But the humming never left. It stayed in my head like a second heartbeat. And now, I can hear it again, not far away, close. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. If you're reading this, take it as a warning. Do not go into the hollows of the Appalachian woods where no trail should be. Do not follow lights that shouldn't move. Do not listen to whispers that call your name. Some places are not meant for the living. And once you hear the hum, it never stops. I have to go now. I can hear something at the door. It's whispering my name. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's a certain thrill in the decay, a beauty in the silence, and a morbid curiosity that gets under your skin when no one else is around. Some people chase urban legends or ghost stories. Me, I chase the physical remnants of lives that once were. That's what led me to the old Willow Creek Sanitarium. It was the kind of place that locals avoided even during the day. The building had been closed for decades, shuttered after a series of unexplained deaths in the 1970s, and whispers of experimental treatments that crossed every ethical line imaginable. By all accounts, it was dangerous, but danger had always been my lure. I arrived in the middle of July. The summer air was thick and heavy, and the smell of damp earth and rot hung around the abandoned grounds like an uninvited guest. The trees had grown wild around the perimeter, branches tangled like the hands of some giant, restless creature. The front gate was rusted shut, but the fence was broken at one corner, enough for me to squeeze through. My first impression of the building itself was all mixed with unease. The main structure was a hulking, Gothic-inspired monstrosity, its brickwork crumbling in places, windows smashed or blackened with soot. The main doors were gone entirely, leaving only a gaping maw that seemed to inhale the light of the day. I hesitated at the threshold, my pulse quickening, not with fear but anticipation. Inside, the air was cool and damp. My footsteps echoed through the hallways, bouncing off walls that were peeling with age and neglect. The smell of mold was overpowering, but beneath it, I thought I caught something else, a faint metallic tang, like blood. I shook it off. I always shook it off. I carried only a flashlight and my camera. I planned to document everything, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized that the flashlight wasn't enough. The shadows seemed almost alive, stretching in impossible ways, pooling in corners where the light shouldn't reach. The building groaned as if protesting my intrusion, and I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I moved through the hallways, snapping photos, trying to capture the eerie beauty of decay. Rusted bed frames in what had been patient rooms, discarded medical equipment half buried under dust, walls covered in strange, faded symbols, scribbles, scratches, and what looked disturbingly like handprints pressed into the plaster. I told myself it was just residue from years of abandonment, but my stomach tightened every time I looked at them. The further I went, the more I felt it, that sense that I wasn't entirely alone. It started as a whisper at the back of my mind, the subtle brush of movement in my peripheral vision. I chalked it up to exhaustion, to nerves. But when I reached the old surgical wing, I knew it was something else. The surgical wing was worse than I imagined. Rusted tables lined the floor, each one stained with the ghosts of procedures long forgotten. Instruments were scattered across countertops, jagged and ominous in their stillness. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I swear I saw a figure at the far end of the room, standing perfectly still. I called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" Nothing. The figure didn't move. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The shadows were just shadows, right? That's what I told myself. I moved on, deeper into the building. The West Wing was where the patients had been housed. Long corridors with rows of rooms, doors hanging off their hinges. I noticed that many of the rooms had personal items left behind. A tattered blanket, a shoe, a small photograph in a rusted frame. I picked up the photograph. It was of a young girl, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. Something about it made my chest tighten. I put it down and kept walking. I had to see the basement. Stories of a sanitarium always mentioned the basement, the experiments, the disappearances. I found the stairs at the end of a long, narrow hall. The air grew colder as I descended. My breath fogged in front of me. The basement was a labyrinth of tunnels and rooms. Most were empty, but some still held remnants of whatever had taken place here. I found cages, some small, some large, and a row of lockers, each with a name crudely etched into the metal. I didn't know what I expected to find down there, but nothing could have prepared me for the smell. It was sweet, almost sickly, mixed with something foul. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint at first, coming from the darkness ahead. "Get out." I froze. My flashlight shook. "Hello," I said again, louder. No response. Just a whisper, repeating, taunting me. I could feel it crawling along my skin, cold and sticky. I turned to leave, but the staircase was gone. Not physically gone, just not there. The walls had shifted, the floor seemed to tilt. Panic surged through me. I ran down the basement corridors, trying door after door, all locked or blocked. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, echoing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My flashlight flickered, and I felt the cold brush of a hand along my shoulder. I spun around. Empty. Finally, I stumbled into a room that looked like a patient's lounge. Old furniture littered the floor, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper. But in the middle of the room was a single chair facing the corner. In it sat a figure. I froze. The figure was small, hunched over, but its face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale surface that seemed to pulse in the dim light. And then it spoke. Not a whisper this time. A voice, low and guttural, that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't be here." I tried to respond, tried to say something, anything, but my voice was gone. The chair shifted, and the figure turned slightly, just enough for me to see what it had in its hands. A photograph, the same photograph I had seen upstairs of the young girl. The figure raised it slowly, showing me the smiling face, then tore in half. And as it did, the walls seemed to breathe, the ceiling sagged, and the shadows moved with intent. I ran, or at least I tried to. The corridors were no longer linear, the doors were mocking me, and the basement seemed to stretch on forever. Every so often, I'd see glimpses of other figures, patients, nurses, doctors, all faceless, all silent, watching me. Some held instruments, others held photographs, all of them waiting. Hours must have passed. Days, maybe. I don't know. Eventually, I stumbled into a room that looked like the main lobby. Sunlight streamed in through the broken windows, and I could see the gate outside. Freedom. But the lobby was empty. Too empty. I took a cautious step forward and froze. There, written on the wall in what looked like dry blood, were words that made my stomach drop. "You are never leaving." I spun around, looking for a way out, and that's when I saw it. A figure at the far end of the lobby, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. This one had a mouth, wide and impossibly stretched, filled with teeth like shards of glass, and it smiled at me. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. I remember the gate, the rush of air, the sunlight blinding me. I remember the trees, the overgrown grass, the sounds of the world outside. I collapsed on the ground, shaking, hyperventilating. I thought it was over. I thought I was free. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the corridors, the shadows, the faceless figures. And then, this morning, I found something on my doorstep, a photograph. It was me, standing in the Willow Creek Sanitarium, smiling in a way that didn't reach my eyes. I burned it. I tore it apart. I told myself it was a prank. It's not. I know it's not. Because last night, I heard a whisper outside my window. Come back. And now, I can't stop thinking about it. About the shadows. About the basement. About the figures that are waiting just beyond the edges of sight. I don't know how they move or how they see me. I only know that something went wrong when I stepped into that building, and it's not done with me. I try to stay away from abandoned places since then. Try to forget. But the Willow Creek Sanitarium has a way of finding you. And I just know, that if I go back, even once, I may never leave. So, I warn you, curiosity kills. Curiosity opens doors that should never be opened. And some places like Willow Creek never forget. And I think it's only a matter of time before they come for me again.
Thank you for staying until the end. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more horror.